Hi, Paige here, the One Foot Gamer. How's it going? I'm doing okay. Sorry it's been a bit of gap since the last video. I do have my other channel to keep up with, One Foot Flipper, and I had some real life stuff, but I'm back now. And today I think we're going to talk about when it's okay for your dungeon to not make sense. Now, I like for dungeons to make sense. I think that monsters should be able to live their lives, eat, sleep, poop, reproduce, come and go as they please, not be stuck behind secret doors or traps. I love for a dungeon to have a functioning ecology. But sometimes it just can't. But there are some ways to make it still make sense anyway. Several of them, matter of fact. The first one is to operate under the idea that the maps you're using and that the players are encountering are not an actual one-to-one layout of the dungeon, but they're just an adaptation or a simplification made for gaming purposes. Now, imagine yourself a sprawling, labyrinthine dungeon with countless corridors, hidden chambers, winding tunnels all over the place. You know, huge map, architectural marvel, but if you translated every nook and cranny onto that game map, the players are going to spend hours navigating empty hallways or dead-end rooms. Like, do you remember any of the Mega Dungeons for 2nd edition? And how they'd have about 97 empty rooms for every one that had anything in it? Yeah. So, we're going to simplify it. We condense the vastness into something manageable, a player representation. This adaptation allows us to focus on the exciting parts, the encounters, the traps, and the mysteries. Now, the dungeon map the players encounter might make it seem like the orcs have no way out of level 2, but that isn't the reality of the situation. The reality is there are many more corridors, secret doors, empty rooms, boring features the players are never going to interact with, and what they're just being presented with is the place boiled down to the simplest version for gaming purposes. This also goes a long way towards solving the problem of where wandering monsters are coming from or going to. Like, you ever look at a module, it's like, Dungeon Level 3, here's the wandering monster chart. Dungeon Level 3, though, only has 5 rooms in it, and they all just connect to each other, and there's a 10-foot hallway at one point. Where would those monsters be coming or going to? But this solves it. They're coming to or going from all those unmapped areas that we're not really going to. And it simplifies chases and pursuits. If you can get out of sight of your pursuers, you can duck down a side corridor and lose them. Same thing. You're chasing the goblins, they get ahead of you, they get out of your line of sight, they can disappear as well. Now, the adaptation method is actually extremely common when it comes to your fantasy towns and cities, particularly in video game RPGs, and the further back in time you go, the simpler they get, even if they never actually spell it out that way. Remember in Final Fantasy how like these cities would have like 14 buildings and 6 occupants? It's quite easy to figure out though if you can do math. Like you look at some of your 2nd edition city maps, there'll be a detailed map of a city, but the population total would require there to be 100 people in every building on the map. Doesn't add up, so I assume it's a simplified map. If you're using this method, I suggest you spelling it out to your players anytime they're going to enter any place that it might apply to. That way, they can't make fun of the fact that the orcs can't make it out of the 2nd level. Now, the next one is the dungeon that is the carefully curated playground, crypt, or death trap of some powerful spellcaster. You know, your Tomb of Horrors, things like that. You know, imagine your ancient sorcerer, long gone from the world of living. His arcane mastery is extended beyond spells. He's woven himself and reality into the stones and shadows of his lair. And the dungeon's not a random assortment of rooms, it's a deliberate creation. Every trap, every guardian, every secret door serves a purpose. The sorcerer's intelligence and ego are etched into its very walls. And those monsters inside, they're not random. They're part of the sorcerer's grand plan. And perhaps these creatures just exist in a state of suspended animation until the intruders arrive. They're frozen in time, waiting for that curtain to rise when the players emerge. Or maybe they're conjured into being as soon as the adventurers breach the threshold. The very act of intrusion births them, a magical response to the disturbance. Now, these sort of dungeons thrive best far from civilization. They'll be nestled in forgotten valleys, atop windswept plateaus, beneath desolate moors, on islands with skull logos. People aren't going to run across these accidentally. They're going to have to seek them out. They're certainly not going to be a mile away from the town. Now, why would a spellcaster create such a thing? Power, legacy, ego. That wizard wanted his name whispered throughout the ages. Asarak. Perhaps he sought immortality through his creation. As long as the dungeon stands, so does his influence. Hey, if you made it this far, why not hit that like and subscribe button? It's the main reason I'm into this. And if you want to support the channel more than that, you can buy something from my eBay store. Links are down below in the description. Alright, third method is one that I really love. It's the idea of the Mythic Underworld. Some dungeons aren't just man-made creations. They have a deep connection to the actual underworld, perhaps a fey realm or some other dimension or extra-dimensional place. Your Mythic Underworld dungeon probably has some sort of portal, chunk of arcane energy, or dungeon heart deep down in the lowest level. Now, this sort of dungeon might have started off as a man-made structure, but it isn't one any longer. The dungeon itself now is something like a living entity. Perhaps it can grow all by itself, sprouting new corridors, rooms, and traps. And the dungeon is not going to limit itself to monsters that walk in the front door on level 1. The dungeon might either grow its own monsters, or they'll come in through the portal at the bottom. This dungeon does not need a functioning ecology, and time in this dungeon might work in a sort of fey realm type of manner for those who live within it. Like, imagine, the Goblin tribe in the Mythic Dungeon doesn't need to eat. Now, they will eat if food is present, and they only have a very vague and fuzzy idea of the passage of time with very poor long-term memory. Every individual day might seem normal, with them going about their normal goblin business of hunting vermin in the corridors, gambling, drinking the contents of their still every time a new batch of liquor is ready. However, they don't seem to be all that aware of the fact that they don't need to eat, or that most of the time they don't seem to age. And your newly born goblins will grow to adulthood in days, not that anyone will notice. And while upon the death of an elder, or a leader, or a spellcaster of some sort, another goblin will quickly age, or become more powerful, or learn magic over the course of a few days to take their place. And their numbers will remain fairly static. There's a tribe of 34 goblins on level 2 because the dungeon wants a tribe of 34 goblins on level 2. Or in the case of a non-sentient dungeon, goblins are just what that room produces, and it can't support more than 34 of them. Now, there is a danger to the Mythic Dungeon if it's of the time variety like we were just speaking of. The players might start to fall victim to the various effects and go native if they stay down there long enough. Each day down there might seem normal. They're slaying monsters, looking for treasure. But over time, their recollection of how long they've been down there will begin to fade, until they're not sure how long they've been down there. Doesn't seem like that long, but it has been. And some great encounters inside those dungeons might be adventuring parties that have been down there for years or decades, or other human groups that have become dungeon natives. That would just be a great thing to encounter inside that sort of dungeon. Now, did you have any other ideas for ways to make a dungeon that doesn't make sense, but still makes sense anyway? If so, why don't you comment down below? Hey, I think before we're finished, I'm going to show you a little something else, and then we'll finish up. Thanks, and I hope to see you again soon. Just wanted to show this off. I recently, over the weekend, picked up a big box of low wall terrain of varying types. It actually came from a Warhammer seller, but you don't need much of this before you can just pretty much put together any room that you want the players to be going into extremely quickly. It looks cooler than using looks cooler than using a real battle mat and drawing it all out. Feels better too, and once you get enough of it, then you can just put anything together that you want.